In this video, you will learn what CSS is and be able to describe its place in web development. So before we begin, let's think back to our analogy of a web page as a house. In order to build a house, we needed a few things. First, we needed the raw materials like wood and bricks. Then we needed the paint and decorations and a plan to put them all together. In this analogy, HTML was the raw materials. It has so much potential, but it's just laying in a pile on the ground. We need the plan and the paint and the decorations to make a home, and that is where CSS comes in. Eventually, we'll want to add electricity and plumbing to make our home functional, which is JavaScript, and we'll learn about that next. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It is a different language than HTML, and it allows us to add style and layout to our web pages. Usually, when we think about web pages, we think about nicely put together, pretty looking sites, and so far what we've built has been pretty bland. HTML and CSS work together to create the web pages we are used to seeing. Once the browser reads the HTML, it will then read the CSS and give different styling rules to different elements in our HTML based on how we select them in our CSS. CSS is really powerful. The same HTML can look very different depending on the CSS applied. Before we can add CSS to our web page, we need to inform the browser that what it is reading is in fact CSS. We can tell the browser right inside HTML elements, namely the style and the link elements. These elements will go in between the head tags as it is not data that we need to render on the page. So there are two ways of including CSS in our HTML. First, we can write our CSS directly between two style tags. This isn't very common, but it would look something like this. More often, we will link to an external CSS file using the link element. This element will include two attributes, rel and href. Rel will refer to the type of file we are linking, in this case a style sheet, and the href will point to the location of the file on your computer, or more simply, the file name. CSS works by referencing a specific tag, in this case, h1. In order for us to apply styling rules to HTML elements, we have to know which elements to apply the rules to. This is where selectors come in. Selectors are used to find or select the HTML elements that you want to style. And you can style all elements of a certain type, all the Ps, divs, h1s, or bodies, or you can select elements with a certain class or ID. By adding a class or ID attribute to an element, it is possible to select an element easily, accurately, and semantically. In CSS, after the name of the selector, we will use curly braces to hold property and value styles for that selector. Styling rules will need to adhere to a certain syntax in our CSS so that the browser knows how to read them properly. Within the braces, we will have the property, a colon, and the value of the rule. This whole chunk would be followed by a semicolon. So it would look like body, open curly brace, background, colon, blue, semicolon, closed curly brace. Or div, open curly brace, color, colon, red, semicolon, closed curly brace. Let's look at a couple properties in detail. First is color. Color will be used for text only, and it will change the color of your text. Next is font family. Font family allows you to change the font and takes values like Times, Courier, Arial, or just generic values like sans serif or serif. We can't use width or height for text like we might with images, but we can determine the size of the font used with font size. You can use any size unit here that you would with a word processor, so pixels, EM, IN, but PX or pixel is the most popular. In addition to using built-in selectors, we can also create our own identifiers called classes and IDs. To do so, we just add an attribute to the HTML element. And the biggest thing to keep in mind when creating classes and IDs is the specificity. IDs should reference only one element in your HTML, while classes can reference many elements. When we added the image to lambdaschool.com, it didn't look anything like we had hoped. Together, we're going to add some CSS style to get this image into the background, to change the text color and style. Now it's time for the we do, where we get to practice these skills together. You should be coding along with me during this portion of the video. So let's start with the simple stuff. Before we do anything else, we're going to add font color and style to our semantic elements. I'll note again that CSS is a great place to practice your Google foo. There are hundreds of CSS styling properties and infinitely more descriptors. You are not expected to know all of these properties. Instead, you should describe your issue to Google, test things out, and use your design eye to find what you like the most. So first, we're going to select our H1, H2, and P elements and assign the color and font family properties to black and sans serif respectively. So we'll type H1, H2, P. We'll open this with a curly bracket. And then our color will set equal to black, the semicolon, and our font family will set equal to sans serif, another semicolon. Next, we want to style our button. So again, we'll select our button elements, use our curly brace. We're gonna set the color here to white. Our background color, we will set to the Lambda School hex code, which is the hashtag or # BB2026. Use another semicolon and then set the font size to 16 pixels. Next, we're going to add ID attributes in HTML and style them by selecting those IDs in the CSS. So we'll start by creating an image container and a text container ID. We want the image container to wrap around everything in our HTML except for higher learning, higher earning, and this text down here. In order to do that, we'll place a div equals image container above our original H1 text. And that will look something like this. Div ID equals image container. And then we'll close the div before higher learning, higher earning. Finally, we can move our image from the body to the div and start getting a more complete website. So we're actually going to take out this whole image portion. So now we're going to head over to our CSS and select the image container ID using the # and then image-container. We'll then set the background equal to a URL, which is the URL where we find our image. It's a little bit off, so we're going to set the background position to center. And now what we should see is something that looks a little bit more like the lambdaschool.com homepage, but a little squished. Next up, we'll learn about the box model, which will help take care of this squishing and get us to a more believable Lambda School replica. Now, read through the materials below and go back to your personal website CodePen to add some style. Style your images, change the text color and the font, really play around with it until you have something that you're really proud of.